Good evening. Welcome to the opening lecture of Inside the Creative Mind 2025. I'm composer Judith Zamont, one of 4 co-directors of Maricopa Arts Council, MAC for short. And this is the 13th annual edition of the series, a wintertime staple of Maricopa's art scene. MAC is an independent nonprofit with the overall mission of empowering the arts. Over time, MAC has introduced our city to many arts happenings, including poetry slams, choreographers competitions, Arts Fest Maricopa, abstract art galleries and contests, silent reading parties, new galleries at City Hall and Maricopa Agricultural Center, World Music Showcase, and much more. We've published a book and maintain the YouTube video channel celebrating Maricopa's arts. MAC believes in paying artists and is very grateful for foundational funding from several sources, including the Arizona Commission on the Arts and local residents. In particular, we honor recent grants through the city's Arts Initiative and several Seed Money Awards from Maricopa Friends of the Arts. All donations are appreciated, of course. Inside the Creative Mind was one of MAC's very first projects, recognizing the extraordinary talent, skills, and professional accomplishments of Maricopa's very own residents. This year, MAC joins the Library and Cultural Center to present a rich and intriguing roster of lecturers from today through to the end of March. Let's please give a big round of applause to the library and the library's director, Angela Howell, and her staff. Current lectures center on literature and photography, music, abstract artworks, and inventive weaving. Full details are on the info cards, which are on the counter over there. We know that the arts are a vast realm, housing many individual worlds. Arts with words and without words. Arts through sight alone or just through sound. Arts purely in movement or through invention in design, and much more. And we often think of creatives as visionaries, unafraid to glimpse the future and make it manifest in the present. Additionally, creativity can sprout up in more than one of these worlds, leading to changes of direction and turning corners. Yet, while the mindset of an artist can appear mysterious, non-linear, and a bit magical, creatives are in fact very practical in conceptualizing new work. Through the Creative Mind lecture series, we look to answer the eternal puzzle: what makes the magic work? Answering this tonight will be author, photographer, computer expert, and aviation enthusiast Kay Fisher. Kay grew up in a small town in western Minnesota. He served in the Navy for over 8 years, then worked at Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, as a software engineer for 30 years, moving from one exciting project to another. In the background, he wrote a monthly column about metal shapers for the New England Modeling Society's newsletter and competed in radio-controlled model airplane and model submarine contests all over New England. A multifaceted creative. After retiring from DEC in 2002, he moved to Mesa, Arizona, where he taught hundreds of senior citizens about computers, Apple and Android phones, and tablets. During this time, he organized a camera club and wrote his first 3 books. In 2019, Kay and his wife, Pat, moved to Maricopa, where he immediately joined the Library Writers Group, the Province Photography Club, and the Model Yacht Club. During his career and retirement, he has built many model airplanes and boats, flown several full-scale aircraft, and been an amateur photographer, an amateur machinist, a software engineer, a teacher, and a writer. It was in Maricopa that Kay created the book he thinks every mother should read, NAV-DEC. A copy of it is over on that table. Having finished this perhaps definitive work, he's now turned to fiction with a series called Water Data. He asks us this question: who doesn't love a murder mystery? Along with computer science, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and finally bringing justice to environmental polluters. A big canvas, and only a multifaceted creator can help us to answer that question. He is Kay Fisher.
I'm glad you recorded that. I'm going to play that over and over right now. I was kind of surprised and very humbled to get the invitation to come here. I think my photography is, I'm an amateur photographer. I've taken pictures all my life. There's a lot of people around me that I know that are in Maricopa that are much better photographers than I am. I love writing, and there are way better writers than I am, but I have fun doing it. So let me do a show of hands first. How many of you have written a book? Raise your hand. All right, now all of you who didn't raise your hand, because it doesn't matter anymore, raise your hand if you think maybe someday you might want to write a book. Don't be bashful. How many times around the kitchen table when relatives come to visit have you told stories that you've laughed about and maybe cried about? And I think all of those stories should be written down. And if you write a book and you have one child and you print one copy for yourself and one for your child, you'll have an incredible sense of accomplishment. And I'm a big advocate of self-publishing. And when I say self-publishing, temper that with a grain of thought, grain of salt. Grain of thought will work too. If you go to these self-publishers and you submit your quote manuscript to them, you can get a book printed for almost nothing. But they will all try and upsell you something. So it's not unusual for people to print their first book to spend hundreds or even thousands of dollars. The last one I got printed, Water Data 1, the brother, the printing cost on this is something like on the order of $3.33. So when I paid my first pass of the book, I sent it to Amazon, plus shipping and handling, which was another couple of bucks because it only ordered one book. So for about $5, I got my first book back. That's all I spent, not a dime more. And I could have printed 100 of them at $3.33 plus shipping. And I could have sold them to my friends. In fact, they sell them on Amazon for $10. Now, when I sell them for $10, I don't make $10. I'll show you later how much you actually make. But it's between $1 and $3 on books typically. And I do that on purpose. I'm not creating a book to make money. I know I'll never be successful at making a lot of money, but I know I'll have some satisfaction and some sharing on every book. My first book was Metal Shapers, and it's a big, thick, heavy book. Color. You know, one of the neat things that happened in publishing, in printing, in the last 15 or 20 years, is when my mother-in-law wrote her book about her life after my father-in-law died. She used it for therapy. She wrote a book, and for her 8 children, which includes my wife and me, we loved it. It cost her about $1,000, and she got enough for each kid and all of the grandkids. But there were several blank pages where they didn't put pictures because they all cost extra. Well, now when you print a book, it doesn't matter whether there's a picture on the page or not. It's the same price per page. So if you have a 200-page book and you put a picture on every page, it doesn't cost you more than if it was just text. So that's a big win, especially for me because I like pictures and everything. Now if you get color pictures, it raises the cost by about 30% more. So this particular one is all color pictures. This one has 1,197 pictures in it of the 540 pages. So that's important. Now I sell this one on Amazon for $20 for the black and white version $45 for the color version, and the ebook is $4. And again, when I first finished it, and this happened because I was a member of the Machinist Club, and I volunteered to become the newsletter editor. And as soon as I became the newsletter editor, I started a shaper column. A metal shaper is a device that looks kind of like this. And in fact, that picture, but the line drawing was the head of every shaper column I did. And I wrote that column for 16 years. But after I wrote the first couple of columns, then people started sending me information from all over the world. And I would just edit what they sent me, so basically I was the editor of this. So it says edited by Kay Fisher. I won't claim to be the author of it, although I authored several columns in the Shaper columns. But this is 16 years of Shaper columns in the New England Model Engineering Society newsletter. And when I put it online, I advertise it in the machinist websites. And I said my goal is to make enough money to break even, because I had to pay about $40 for my own copy. And then I made a lot of line edits and threw it away and got another copy and another copy. I'll pass it around. This is show and tell too.
Yes.
Now, it's interesting because that's the only one where I have any real significant sales numbers for, because that's been out for quite a while. And the first volley sold quite a few. So overall, I sold 522 of those. And it's interesting, the breakdown, because I really wanted to make sure people could afford it if they wanted it. So the $4 ebook is as cheap as you can get them. On Amazon, and first I published them on Lulu. Lulu's another platform that does this. I moved everything from Lulu to Amazon recently. That was a lot of work, but not for the normal reasons. But at any rate, I made it available in three, both as an ebook, a black and white, and a color, so that if you wanted a printed book, you could get it as cheap as I could sell it to you. But at any rate, 60% of the sales were ebooks, and 13% were black and white, and 28% color. So of the people who were willing to get or had to get the print book, most of them preferred to pay a lot more to get color. So then the second book was almost released almost exactly at the very same time, because one wasn't related to another. I knew someday I was going to do a book. This picture I've had hanging up actually in our last house in the bathroom, so I saw it every day. I made this picture many years ago of every car we've ever owned. And it was fun to do. And I had to cheat a little. I didn't have pictures of every car we owned. I had to go on the internet and find some, and then Photoshop them in so they were the same color and the same size and same shape, and change the background so I wasn't violating any copyright. But at any rate, I kept looking at this picture thinking, you know, there's a story behind every one of those cars. And that became the second book, which is really about the same. And they called that One Town Kid. And by the way, the cover on the Shaper book, the picture, I printed out 8.5 by 11 outline drawings and gave them to my granddaughters to color. And I made that the cover artwork for the book. And one granddaughter didn't color very well, so one of the blue pictures in the back, my wife Pat colored. So I like making the covers more than I do writing the book. So this is One Town Kid. That's a picture of me and my mom. I was 14 in that picture. And I'll pass this around for show and tell too. I have a couple things I want to read out of it. I would like to encourage all of you to write a book. Don't think for a moment that your life wouldn't be that interesting. Think of all the stories you told around the kitchen table over the years. Your children and grandchildren and friends will appreciate it. You don't have to know how to run a computer or even type. Just scribble down each idea as it occurs to you. Your children or your grandchildren can easily turn your random pieces of paper into a self-published book. Write a book. This is a poem that my mother-in-law wrote that I put at the very beginning of this book on page 1. It's called Remember by Elaine Law. There are a lot of words inside me that I still want to say. Someday they'll be written down. I'll do some each day. It may be a silly story, a thoughtful line or two, or maybe just a memory before my life is through. I may never really finish. That I know is true, but if I only leave a memory, a simple thought or two, and somehow after I am gone, they bring a smile or a tear, maybe someone will remember that indeed I have been here. You know, after the great introduction, that's what Judge Judy would call puffing. Trying to make yourself look more important than you are. The only significant thing I've ever done in my whole life was to marry my wife, Pat, back in 1966. She could marry me, but my mother had to sign for me to marry her. That's the way the law was in South Dakota at the time. We had to drive across the border from Minnesota where I lived because in South Dakota, you didn't have the waiting period to get married that you had in Minnesota, and I was home on leave from the Navy. I've sold as a stretch, 94 of these. Now when I say sold, that means I gave one away to every brother and sister that Pat had, and my sister-in-law and my brother and every normal relative. And then all of our friends, and we lived in an RV park in Mesa at the time, I sold it to them for what it cost me. So every time I sold them a book, I usually either made or lost about 25 cents, depending on the shipping and handling. And one of the nicest compliments I think I ever got on the book was when one fellow walked up to me and said, "You know, I was halfway through your book when I thought it was about me." And I was really proud of that. The first chapter is Cars I Have Known, so that's where I told the story behind every car. Then after I wrote that chapter, well actually, the first chapter is an intro. So when I decided to write the book, I had just also returned from Minnesota for my brother's funeral. And I did sort of a eulogy for my brother. And afterwards, when I got home, I wrote it all down and printed it out and sent it to my sister-in-law about her husband. And she loved it and cried over it. And I thought, you know, what I said at his funeral says more about me than it says about my brother, because it was about our interactions. So I put that in the first chapter of the book. The second one's Cars I Have Known, and Airplanes I Have Known, because when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation. I was an aviation fire control technician. Now, a lot of people, when you say fire control, they think of fires. Fire control has nothing to do with fires. It has to do with shooting things. It's either guns or bombs. And I was in the aviation section, so I was maintaining the radar and bombing systems of the world's largest carrier-based aircraft, an A3D Skywarrior. Now, the third book is called She's Pat, I'm Kay. And the cover's obvious, it's just our pictures, but Pat can tell you, thousands and thousands of times people have walked up to me and said, "Hi, Pat." And by the same token, they walk up to her and say, "Hi, Kay." And we say, "No, she's Pat, I'm Kay." So that's where that came from. Well, the reason this book happened was because one of the reviews I got from the book called One Town Kid was my friends kept saying, "There's nothing in it about your family." Okay, I wrote one about my family, which of course has tons of pictures. Now in this case, I had this book around for years, and I just updated it recently because the last 6 years in Maricopa wasn't in there, so I added Maricopa, so that's like the last chapter now. But in the process, when I went to print it, I said, nobody's going to buy this anymore. I gave it to some of my friends in Val Vista, but sold it to them at cost. Nobody's going to buy this except us. So I splurged and got the deluxe color version. $55 list price. I forget what my price cost. When you sell things on Amazon, there's a minimum that you can sell for it. And so even if you have a book that costs, like the one cost $33.33 to ship it to my house, but if I sell it, the minimum I can charge is like $10, I think. But this is an example of if you have a book printed from Amazon or Lulu and you get their deluxe color, which is like what you typically think of as if you had like a photo book. And people seldom do that in 6x9 format. But I did. I wanted to see how good the color would come out. And we love this book. And when I read it, because it's our life, it's like every photo album we ever had. And I can't read it without getting a tear in my eye and then laughing at other parts. But I'll pass that around for Shulta. And by the way, I love this title, The Creative Mind. You know, if you were poor, you'd be crazy. And if you're rich, you'd be
eccentric.
Eccentric, that's the word I'm looking for. But if you're in the middle, maybe you have a creative mind. My mom would never have said I had a creative mind. That's when your mother uses your first name and last middle name too. And by the way, I've sold 73 of those. Again, mostly at break-even cost to family and friends. Well, the families got them free. The friends paid what I paid. So that got me to the fourth book, which I'm very proud of. This one's called NAVDEC, DEC. The people who worked at DEC just called Digital Equipment Corporation DEC. It was always DEC this, DEC that. And all of our hardware and all of our software had DEC in it. DEC System 5, DEC System 8, DEC Writers, DEC this, DEC that. We got used to that. And all of our jackets said DEC on them someplace. It was a wonderful company. A guy named Ken Olson started it, and it became the mini computer revolution. It was a heavenly place to work. I looked forward to every Monday. And it didn't matter if you weren't in manufacturing, you were wage class 4, it didn't matter when we came to work or when we left. So if you came at 6 in the morning, there would already be a whole bunch of people there working. And if you left at 6 or 8 at night, there would still be people there working. Because they had a project and they were gonna finish it. And it didn't matter how many hours, some guys slept under their desk. And we all just loved it. At any rate, the cover art was fun. By this point in my life, I determined I can't write a book without first determining the title and doing the cover art. So I did the title and the cover art before I wrote the first word. And I really wanted to call it McHale's Navy, but that was already taken. And there was all kinds of spin-offs of McHale's Navy. I thought McHale's this or Navy, nothing worked, but NAVDEC worked. So the picture on the front, that's an A3D Sky Warrior, largest carrier-based aircraft in the world. That Sky Warrior is Navy's first bomber that could carry a nuclear weapon. So it was made in the 50s, and it went on to in later years, other planes could do a better job at attack than this could, so they became tankers and reconnaissance planes. So they either carried cameras or fuel. So when I was in it, we were flying tanker missions over the Gulf of Tonkin during Vietnam. And we were on the Oriskany flying 24/7. We'd have 12 hours on, 12 hours off. And there were 3 aircraft carriers in the South China Sea. 2 carriers would be launching, one during noon to midnight, the other one midnight to noon. And then a 3rd carrier would come in, relieve one of the carriers. We'd go to the Philippines for a few days, come back out and cycle around. It was fascinating. Unfortunately, we were killing people, but the technology and the way it worked was just fascinating. So I wrote about all those adventures in there. Well, and the second airplane is an A6A Intruder. I worked on those for several years too. And then that's the logo for Digital Equipment Corporation. And on the back, that's what our first computer looked like. It was a mechanical analog computer. It could add, subtract, multiply, divide, do square roots, differentiation, and integration mechanically. Imagine that. This is a bombing problem. When we were in A school in Memphis, Tennessee, we spent 2 weeks learning the mathematics behind the bombing problem. And did that ever help us in our repairing these? Not a bit. But they thought fire control technicians have to know how these things work and what they're computing. And then these were computers from Digital Equipment Corporation. Oh, and I want to talk about the target population. When I wrote it, I thought my target population was going to be geeks and veterans. Geeks for the DEC part and veterans for the Navy part. And indeed, a few people on Amazon that bought it were either geeks or veterans. But I found that ladies enjoyed it more. And I think the reason, it didn't occur to me until way after the book was out and some people had it. The reason is because apparently I write in sort of a teaching style. And so when I talk about anything and there's a term that I figure everybody doesn't know that, I go off on a tangent and explain it in excruciating detail, my wife will say. So for instance, on one chapter here, while I was in digital, at lunchtime in evenings, for 2 years I was writing a chess program. So of course I documented how you write a chess program on a computer. Pat thinks it was terribly boring, but I thought it was fascinating. I want to read a little chunk of it. Oh, and also there's extensive glossaries in here. Again, that's part of the teaching thing. So if there's something that I didn't cover and there's an acronym there, it's all in the back. You can't miss any of it. Because if you care about writing books, you care about the cost. I'll pass this around, so we'll call this full disclosure. So for each of these books, there's the print cost, what it actually would cost me, plus shipping and handling. There's the list price, which there's minimums, and a couple of these are above the minimum, but most of them are at the minimum. And so for instance, one pound kit, I make $1.41 if somebody buys it on Amazon. the black and white. I think $2.93 if they buy the color. And so I'll pass this around so you can see what the royalties are on all of these. And there's even a QR code if you want to go there. And then also I'll pass around the reviews I got on One Top Kid. As you're not all up here looking, here's another smaller copy of every car we've ever owned. And so we're talking about cover art for NAVDEC. There's what the cover art is. And if you look close at all of the ones and zeros there, they actually mean something. And there's an appendix in the back with the ASCII code so you can try and figure out what it means. And it has significance in my life. And nobody has come up with, they've never bothered to figure it out yet. But it is what it is. I had to do that. I guess that's a cookie. Okay, now I want to read a little bit. And this will be short, I promise. This is Chapter 9, the Oriskany Fire, 26 February 66. Fire aboard ship is a major concern. Most people would be surprised how often we have fires at sea. On board the Oriskany, we had 1 or 2 fires every week. Perhaps once every 2 or 3 weeks, we would have a fire serious enough to bring the ship to general quarters. That is where we set condition 0, meaning we close all the hatches to ensure watertight integrity of the ship. Fortunately, there is a rate that handles these fires, the damage controlman. And I have a little inset here explaining what a damage controlman is. And I'll read it because it's short. While all sailors are trained in the basics of damage control and first aid, damage controlmen are the first responders who are critical to preventing accidents. Training in firefighting, ship stability, and chemical, radiological, and biological warfare defense. These sailors are masters of it all. Whether there is a burst pipe in the mess decks or an explosion on the flight deck, they are there to keep the ship and its crew out of harm's way. It seemed like a high percentage of the fires were in the mess hall. Keep in mind that in those days, smoking was very common aboard ship. It seemed like 80 or 90% of the sailors were smokers. On Wednesday at 7:26 a.m. on the 26th of February 1966, we were up in our avionics shop. Night operations had been canceled because of a storm. Lieutenant Commander Maxwell was in an A3D on his way to the catapult for the first launch of the day, and most of the ship was still asleep. First, we heard on the 1MC the announcement of yet another fire, directing the damage control personnel to the hangar deck forward. We thought little of it and continued with our work. A few minutes later, the ship went to general quarters and set condition 0. At that time, we were just happy that we were in our shop already and didn't need a trip to the head. That's the bathroom. A few minutes later, it became apparent that this was slightly more than a normal fire. We were locked in our shop and prepared to ride it out. Then we started seeing smoke coming up into our shop through a deck hatch that went down to the hangar deck. So we wet some rags and stuffed them around the hatch to stop the smoke. We were talking about the fire, thinking this must be something serious. Shortly after that, we started getting smoke coming into our shop from the fresh air ventilation system. Okay, now we were getting concerned. We had an interesting problem. We were not allowed to abandon ship without destroying all the top secret documentation in our shop, and we were not allowed to exit the shop because of condition 0 was set. We looked to our first class in our shop who was in charge of our leadership. As we were considering our options, the smoke started getting thicker and thicker. Finally, the first class made the command decision to leave the shop and go through a condition 0 hatch and make sure to secure it behind us. We exited our shop and followed the first class. When we left the shop, the companionway was filled with white smoke, but instead of going aft through the hatch and then out to the starboard sponson of the ship, he led us down one level and then out. As we went down instead of the direct route outside, which I knew well, I suddenly became concerned for the first time. I knew there was a destroyer behind us, and I knew I could tread water for hours, but first I would have to get off the ship, not wander around in white smoke. Fortunately, at the next level down, the 01 level, we exited the ship onto the starboard side sponson. Nimble fingers. So, here's a picture that they took of the Constellation while we were on fire. And here's a picture taken down the starboard side of the sponson. And I was probably in with that group, but I couldn't say for sure because there were multiple sponsons. And I was only there for 5 or 10 minutes before I went up on the flight deck to drag fire hoses around. There we found fresh air. As we looked up to the front of the ship, it was solid smoke up to the bow. It wasn't long until the ship turned slightly to starboard, and then all the smoke covered us. Apparently the captain was steering zigzag so that the smoke would alternate between coming down the starboard side and the port side. This allowed any sailors on either side to experience some fresh air. And I'll pass this around for show and tell. The chapter goes on for many, many, many pages. And if you care about the ending, 44 guys died that day. And the reason they died, in my opinion, and I'm not alone, is not the reason that the Navy gave. And that frustrates me to no end. So I had this chapter on all the cars we had known. But before I got to cars, I had 2 motor vehicles when I was a kid. When I was about 10 years old, I had a Schwinn bicycle with a 5/8 horsepower Briggs & Stratton mounted on it. A couple of years later, I got a Cushman Eagle. But in between, my good friend Wally had a motor scooter that I rode. And this is a picture of the motor scooter. And so this part of, should be called vehicles I have known, is called Wally's motor scooter. My good friend Wally Peck had a great scooter which he made from a frame kit. He let me drive it several times. Again, I don't have a picture of it, neither does Wally. But the Army version pictured here, and it's this one, I'll pass it around, is very similar to it. It was a fun ride, and you could drive around all day with your hands off the handlebars. It was very stable. I noticed that when I went over the railroad tracks, the handlebars would start oscillating violently, and I had to reach out and stop them. We had a pair of railroad tracks crossing the main street in Hawley, which was actually 6th Street, probably 50 feet apart. I would ride along with no hands, hit the first tracks, reach out and stop the oscillation, then take my hands off the handlebars, hit the second set of tracks, and again, reach out and stop the oscillation. I was out on Highway 10 one day with it, and rode all the way from there to the center of town with no hands. After I got to the first set of tracks, I thought I would just let the handlebars oscillate and then hit the second pair of tracks and it would stop it. When I hit the second set of tracks, the front wheels just buckled under me and I was face first in the pavement. My hands were scraped up and bleeding. When I got up, there was a highway patrol car that had followed me in from the highway. The officer said, "Well, kid, did you learn your lesson?" "Yes, sir," I replied, and I got back on the scooter and took it back to Wally's house. Wally was a great friend who did a lot more for me than help me with my scooter passion. So I'll pass that around for show and tell. Now we're almost to our break, so let's draw a raffle ticket, and you can get up and we'll have a 7th inning stretch here and help yourself to the end of the snacks and stuff. This is halfway through, and everybody got a ticket, right? All right, so what we're going to do is if the first raffle ticket that gets it gets your choice of this picture, the Maricopa horses, and then I have 2 other 11 by 14 pictures. She's opening it. Oh, you want me to draw it? You'll be impartial. Like I know the numbers. And then we have some books to give away. It ends in 165. You want the big picture?
Of course.
The books are better. If you want, you can just wait till later to take it.
I wrote myself that.
Okay. So while she's doing that, let me mention, when I first took that picture, there's a horse right out front. I took a picture of a few of the horses, and then I got to thinking, what am I going to do with all these horses? And so I went to the librarian to ask, is there a list someplace of where all of these horses are? And she didn't know, but she found a website for me that had a list. And there are 19 horses in Maricopa. And it was part of an arts initiative. And of the 19, some of them are symmetrical. The left side is the same as the right side. And some of them aren't. So if they aren't, to me, that's 2 horses. So I ended up with a herd of, I think it's 39. And I had to flip them all till they face left and right and eliminate the backgrounds and add dust and find a good picture of Maricopa Mountain. And I can't tell you how many versions of jet streams I had The newest pictures are slightly different. This is like version 9 or 10, and the other two that I have are versions 11 or 12. I keep changing it, but it was fun to make. And at least one gal, I was able to give an 8.5 by 11 picture to one of the authors, one of the artists that drew one of the pictures. I never talked to her, but I talked to her daughter, and she said she cried when she got it, so that was pretty cool. Okay, so I have two more of those in the smaller versions. Where are they? Right here. These are 11 by 14s. I'm picking up the winner. Ends in 162. 162, anybody?
We're visiting.
Picture or a book?
What picture? Oh, yeah, the picture.
Got it? 163. Well, I got one more of the horses or a book. I took the pictures of the horses that had made the composite from that. Of them. Is that which one?
Yes.
Okay. 959.
9:59. Oh my goodness, yes.
Now we're down to books.
Yeah, that's perfect. Let them have the picture. The hardest part is picking which one, but I think I'd like to pick that's okay. My son was a machinist and CNC programmer.
951, that one, you can get it, but I have to
Oh, very good.
talk about it first.
All over.
Anybody have any questions before I go on?
Yeah, I have a real question.
Yeah.
My question is, you are amazingly productive in a number of different artistic fields. You've spoken to us about the practicalities of the books, but you didn't tell us in detail about where the inspiration comes to sit down and do this, and how long it takes to go from start to finish on a book manuscript.
Okay.
The practicalities of printing it and publishing it are one thing. We're also interested in the artistic side of the process. Could you tell us a bit about yours?
Sure, the inspiration for the first book was this picture. Then we rolled on every hobby I've ever had. The inspiration for the other one was, well, you don't say anything about your body, your family, so that was obvious. NAVDEC was from my heart. I wanted to tell a story about digital, its rise and fall, if you will, but I also wanted to tell the story about the Oriskany Fire. And the only way I knew how to get to the Oriskany Fire was to start out in boot camp and work my way up through it until I left the Navy 8.5 years later. So the Oriskany Fire was a very small part of that time period, but it was very therapeutic to actually write it down. Now, when you get to any of those chapters, especially the Oriskany Fire, I learned a lot. I thought I knew everything there was to know about that fire because I was there, but when I read online all the other accounts of it and some of the disciplinary action that happened afterwards, it's all in the book. Yes, she's raising her hand.
And you didn't mention that during the Oriskany Fire, you were only 19 years old.
Yeah, well,
That's,
the whole ship was 19-year-olds, and you know, the chiefs in charge were like 21 and 22 years old, so, you know, the Navy's young. The services are all fairly young people. Lieutenant Commander Myceo, who died in the fire, he was probably 28, something like that. Wonderful man. Anyway, the first fiction book, Water Data, I did the title first and the cover first, and I said, okay, I want to do a murder mystery, and I wanted to have something to do with the environment and the guy that handles a problem. And then I always had this dream, which never was true with me, but it is true of my character in my book, because I only had a brother. I always thought that brothers should make a pact with each other that if anything bad ever happened to them, it's the other brother's job to do the revenge. So when in Water Data 1, when the hero's brother is killed, that's the first chapter, that sets the stage for the book. And then the story goes along and things happen in my head, and I say, well, we'll add this, which you could argue has nothing to do with the plot. At one point, one of his employees' sister is complaining about the cruise that she took with it, you know, and so she should have gotten much more out of the cruise company than they delivered. So he's got some resources, he's got lawyers, he's got hackers that he can hire, and so he ended up getting even with the cruise company, or her, on her behalf, with a threat of a class action lawsuit. But anyway, that's it. And then there's other environmental polluters that happen along the way. So that set the stage for, that's what this guy does. I didn't know what he did when I started writing the book. I just knew that his brother was going to be killed and he was going to avenge his death somehow. And then he went here, and they said, well, what can happen to him here? And if his brother got shot, what kind of rifle did he get shot with? Well, that could be interesting. And in fact, I found there's only a unique cartridge that could only have existed in the late 1800s. And so there's pictures of that, and I did research. So you spend a lot of time on tangents. And I'll say Google, but I use ChatGTP a lot, because ChatGTP is like a good Google. So you can ask a question. In the 1800s, what kind of rifle could be accurate at 300 yards?
Right.
And they'll give you a list. And I'll say, well, do any of those have unique cartridges? They give you a list. And then I have to go someplace online to find a picture of that cartridge, because I wanted to put it in the book, that I have permission to publish. So it's not copyright protected. So you have to find something in the public domain or get somebody's permission. At one stage, in one of the last chapters, I wanted a picture from the movie Goldfinger, where the girl is in gold on the, and I found the picture online, but it's owned by Getty. And to put that one picture in my book, which I hope to sell to 20 people, Getty wanted $500. Not going to happen. But my wife embroidered a picture of a nude on this thing that's been over our bed for 58 years. And so I took a picture of that, and that's in the book as though it's part of the plot. And you know, but anyway, it took probably a year and a half to do the text part, and a lot of time chasing down things. My guy has to fly in a jet and get as fast as he can from Pensacola, Florida, to Rota, Spain. How fast can a jet go, and what jet can go that fast, and how many does it have to refuel on the way, and what kinds of things do they talk about on the radio while they're doing in-flight refueling? And so people, Tom's read my books. Tom, read and Tom. Tom's a great writer and a great friend, and he gigs me on stuff, and I make a lot of changes because of Tom. But also, he disagrees with me on a lot of things, and sometimes, for instance, I have a lot of tangents, and they do not relate to the plot, but they relate to my character. That's what my character did. I can't help if he goes on tangents. So then the next book, which I'm in the middle of, that's called Water Data 2. So picking a title is important. When you pick a title, you want it to be so unique that if somebody searches for it on Amazon, they don't find other ones. So once I got Water Data 1, I don't have a copyright on it. I copyright the book, but I don't have a copyright on that word. But there are no other water datas. So it's Water Data 1 dash the brother, Water Data 2 dash toxic bubbles. You've probably seen the pictures of the bubbles. And I did that because I had this picture of bubbles, and I thought, how can I relate that to my hero having some sort of an environmental problem? And that became the storyline. And of course, there has to be a murder involved with this. So my guy's, he just left Peru. But that, you do a lot of research. I've never been to Peru. Yeah.
Do you know how this second book will end?
Oh yeah, I
You
knew.
do? Okay.
I knew the first paragraph and the last paragraph, sort of. Then I got to put 200 pages in between, or so. And I've gotten in the habit lately that my chapters are like 4 to 6 pages long. Because when I read at night, I want to get to the end and have some conclusion and some hook to the next chapter. But I want to be able to put it down and not put it down in the middle of a chapter. I hate it when chapters are a mile long. And then when I pick it up, I say, where was I? Water Data 1, the brother. And again, I had more fun with the cover art. So here's the reviews of it. Tom's here. I'll read Tom's review. Kay Fisher's book is a trip down memory lane for aged techies, Vietnam-era naval... Oh, that's the wrong book. That's NAVDEC. At any rate, he gave me a good review on NAVDEC. Here's the cover. When you produce a book, you get a template. Doesn't matter whether it's from Lulu or from Amazon. It looks something like this. And this is accurate dimensions. That's 6 by 9. But what's important, you put your picture on this, whatever you want on your book. You have to leave room for their ISBN.
Yes.
Now, on Lulu, they didn't. But Lulu, you could put it inside, or they would put it on the back. But anyway, the spine is interesting because this tells you that the spine has to be 0.896 inches or 22.77 millimeters. And if you edit your book and add about 3 pages, the spine distance changes. So you have to, you can trivially make a change to a book. Once you've released a book and you decide, and I did this, and depends which version you have, but in Water Data 1, one of the editions that went out, John Deere was spelled wrong, D-E-E-R instead of D-E-R-E. And I didn't know it. Nobody reviewed it, noted it until it was too late. Noted it. So when you make a change, you just go in, edit the file, and re-release it, and then a day or so later, it's the next version people get. It's all automatic and quick. But if you change the bloody page count by much, like 2 pages sometimes, depends what, if you're on the edge, then the spine changes and you have to redo the template. Again, you just do it with a photo editor. You put the picture here, the picture there, leave this section in the middle white, put the text the way you want it. So that's a template for show and tell. And then here's Water Data 1 cover art that went into Amazon. And again, I want to tell a story with the picture. The graph is supposed to represent some interesting data in the ocean. And there's my ocean and a whale tail. And there's a write-up here that tells you a little bit about the book in terms of the dialogue, what the hero was like. And then the numbers in the background are the numbers that were used to create that graph. And the graph, I had so much fun doing that because the numbers are actually a spreadsheet that I had from 16 years in Maricopa where I ran the coffee and donuts every Saturday morning. That's how many people showed up at each Saturday morning coffee and donuts, made the graph. When I want a picture, I use my own if I can, and if I can't, I try and find them on the internet. This is the cover. This is the picture I use for page 1 in the book, in black and white. I'll pass it around. That's the tugboat Scrappy. And I brought Scrappy in. This is Scrappy. I can turn these lights on. Scrappy was a fun project because when I finished my first sailing vessel when I moved here, Emma, after I finished Emma, I wanted to do another boat. I did a couple other sailboats, but then I still had all this scrap wood left over. So Scrappy was made out of the scrap wood. And you'd be amazed how many model cars I had to buy at Goodwill to come up with all these tires of the right sizes. I kept buying cheap cars at Goodwill for 98 cents tearing the tires off, lining them up, saying, no, too big, too small, doesn't fit. And also I learned the hard way, when you put tires on the side of a tugboat, you have to drill holes in the bottom of them, because it'll lean like this and lean like that. Next thing you know, when you pick it up, the tires are still full of water when they go to put it in the car. Let me read a little bit. Now, I really wanted to do a brief thing on Water Data 1, but I couldn't find a section that expressed any thought that I thought you would be interested in without doing a little more. So this is chapter 1. While standing on the bridge of the tugboat Not Us, now Not Us is spelled N-A-U-T-U-S, my cell phone chimed showing a text message from my cousin Wayne. It simply said, "It's your brother. You better call his home ASAP." The cell phone service along the Mississippi was hit or miss as we traveled between cell towers. I had to wait until we traveled downriver another hour before I could make a phone call. I had been testing our new software package on Captain Tom's newest tug. And by the way, Tom back there is my model for Captain Tom. I have a picture of him, which eventually will be in one of these books. Captain Tom, I'm describing the fictitious Captain Tom now, is a 6'2" barrel-chested man with a beard and a gentle soul. His handshake would bring a weightlifter to his knees. Captain Tom and I have had a business and friend relationship since our first meeting 20 years earlier when my company Water Data was a startup. I convinced Captain Tom that sharing his data with the world would be good and he would eventually receive many benefits from the acquired data. We were trying to lower the cost and increase the speed of acquiring sensor data with our latest store and forward software. The team had worked hard on this software release, but now my focus changed to concern for my brother Rick. I told Captain Tom, I haven't heard from my cousin Wayne since last Christmas, and he never sends me a text message. My first thought was, Rick must have been in an accident. Time passed slowly for the next hour as we pushed the barge along. As we lumbered down the river, a trail of seagulls followed behind, feeding on the debris kicked up off the bottom from the prop wash. In years past, there wasn't so much bottom kick-up, but the Mississippi River level was getting dangerously low. If the Mississippi gets much lower, it will bottleneck the transportation of goods, and we will all be impacted by increased freight costs. But enough of my rant. In my mind, I was singing the Hollies song, He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother. It's a long, long road from which there is no return. He ain't heavy, he's my brother. Let's sing. Captain Tom said, you seem deep in thought. Not really, just singing a song in my head. Whenever I ask you what you're thinking, it's always about a song. Yeah, people think I'm obsessed that way, but as Popeye says, I am what I am. As we neared Osceola, Arkansas, I picked up a cell tower and called Rick's phone. My cousin Wayne answered. I recognized his voice right away. Not a good sign. Hi Wayne, this is Ramey. What's up? I'm sorry to say that Rick has been killed, said Wayne. The police found him in his Jeep jammed against the cactus in Gold Canyon. We think he was driving to a golf course. We don't know any details, but the Pinal County Sheriff's Department says he died of a bullet wound. A friend of mine told me about Rick's car beside the road surrounded by police cars, so I went to check it out. I helped the sheriff's deputy with Rick's iPhone finding out which contacts were next of kin. Wayne went on to say that he had contacted Rick's wife, Linda, who was visiting her sister in Albuquerque. She would now be on her way home at Linda's speed, fast. Linda couldn't get a hold of her daughters. She asked her sister Maxine to call them. The twin girls, Margot and Marion, were seniors at MIT. The twins adored Maxine, and Linda trusted her to make any decisions with the girls. Wayne, who was now at Rick's house, asked me if I knew where they hid the key. His first thoughts were about the gold. My first thoughts were about their dog, Smokey. I can't tell you how many times we admonished Rick and Linda for openly displaying the gold. Rick, an accomplished woodworker in semi-retirement, had replaced most of the store-bought furniture with creations of his own. A custom-built coffee table with a partial glass top and custom lighting showed off his collection of gold artifacts became the centerpiece of their living room. He had to drill through the concrete floor and run underground cables to supply power to the coffee table. We always worried about the open display of valuable gold artifacts in his work of art. I knew about the outside key as I had used it myself several times before Rick installed the electronic door lock. You could get in with a simple key, but finding the hiding place in the backyard almost required a pirate's map. I would walk 10 paces east of the bird bath, then find the first patio block that didn't have a crack in it. On the north side of the block, exactly 18 inches, dig in the rocks to find a pill bottle with a key in it. You had to know Rick to appreciate the hunt. I told Wayne the secret code to the new door lock, 7734, like the old children's joke, spell hell upside down. Lastly, I asked Wayne to make sure their dog Smokey was okay. After the phone conversation, I informed Captain Tom of my problem, and he offered to book a water taxi and an Uber ride to the nearest airport. As it turned out, we didn't need either. Captain Tom started calling for more power out of his twin diesel engines at great expense to him in fuel costs as he pushed the barge downstream at an alarming rate. He offered to beach the barge and proceed at flank speed, but I declined his offer. Nonetheless, Tom felt the need to make haste to the nearest port. We were headed to the limestone landing at Sugar Creek, 32 miles north of Memphis. I called the office and asked Loretta, our company's all-around office manager, to get me a flight from Memphis to Sky Harbor Airport or Mesa Gateway. 10 minutes later, Loretta called back. She could get a flight that departed in 1 hour from Memphis to Phoenix. The next flight out was 8 hours later. Listening in on the conversation, Tom grabbed the phone from me and said to Loretta, "This is Captain Tom. Book the flight in 1 hour. I'll get him there." When the call with Loretta ended, Tom told me he had a good friend who would meet us at the limestone landing and started making phone calls. 20 minutes later, Tom maneuvered the barge into the landing dock, and a guy was waiting for me at the pier. I grabbed my M2 MacBook and my go bag and hopped off the boat, waving back to Tom, mouthing the words, "I owe you." I followed my new friend and driver Fred to his car, a customized 49 Merc with a chopped roof and side pipes. I put my bag and laptop in the back seat. When he fired up the engine, I couldn't help but think of the old movie and the song Thunder Road. I gotta sing again. With G-Men at his taillights and roadblocks up ahead, the mountain boy took roads that even angels feared to tread. Here we were coming down Tennessee back roads, avoiding US 51 and I-40 because Fred said the speed limit and the cops would slow us up. I wasn't scared so much as it was exciting. As we rolled into the Memphis International Airport, a young fellow was waiting to escort me to the aircraft. He waved hi to Fred, grabbed my go bag out of my hand, and said, "We should hurry, they're holding the flight for you." As I entered the forward cabin, I waved thank you to the young fellow whose name I did not know. The flight attendant escorted me to my seat. She said, "Captain Tom asked me to put you in first class. Sometimes it pays to have friends with connections." En route, I started taking notes for Rick's eulogy, which I knew I would be expected to deliver. By the time we landed at Sky Harbor Airport, 3 hours and 11 minutes later, I had a long list of ideas to work from. I've always been impressed with the artistic flair of the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport. When departing the airplane, it becomes readily apparent that you have entered the desert Southwest. As you leave the airport, the bridges and overpasses in the Valley of the Sun are impressive works of art. I rented a red Chevy Suburban from Budget. I would rather have rented the Kia Soul they had in the compact category, but I was concerned that I might have to haul around a lot of relatives for the next few days. As I drove toward Apache Junction on US 60, I swear you could see the gas gauge going down as I looked at it. This was a beast of a car. Thank God it had front and rear sensors for parking assistance. Speaking of God, I hope he can bring comfort to Linda and the twins, and I hope he can forgive me for what I am about to do. And that's the end of chapter 1. I'll pass this around for show and tell. It's the only one, but it's fair game when we lottery tickets. If you want this one, you can get it. Tom said in his review, the further you get into the story, the better the story. If there's a negative aspect to the story, it's that there is not enough Captain Tom.
By the way, I'm 6'3", not 6'2".
So this is the cover for Water Data 2, Toxic Bubbles. And the toxic bubbles part of the
It was
title.
up on the screen.
Yeah, timely, isn't it?
It was up several times on the screen.
And here's the first page. And this one starts off, of all places,
Printed much darker.
on the way to a ice house on Silver Lake outside of Hawley, Minnesota. And trust me, as a teenager, I had an ice house
on Silver Lake, outside Hawley, Minnesota. So I know what it's like to be 40 below and windy.
What did you fish for?
Well, I was a young kid. I fished for anything that would get my line, but if I took it home, Mom would clean it. I never cleaned a fish in my life. We wanted walleyes, but I settled for perch. You can have little square holes and fish with reel. You can have big rectangular holes and fish with a spear. And we did both, and it was fun. So I just have things to do for show and tell here. This is a picture of my camera collection. So if you have an old film camera you don't want, you want to throw it my way, I'll take it. And if I have no use for it, I'll try to get it in good hands. Sometimes that means just giving it to Goodwill. A lot of my cameras came from Goodwill. A lot of them were donated to me by friends. Some of the cheapest cameras came from friends. Some of the most expensive cameras came from friends. So there's no balancing them. When we were at Monument Valley, I made, well, everybody made these pictures of Monument Valley, but this particular one I printed this way because I had them printed. I had this one printed on canvas, and I put it in the living room, and I didn't like it in the living room because it was dull. It wasn't glossy like I wanted the picture to be in the living room. So I ended up putting it in our bedroom, and it fit in the bedroom perfect. So each of these is 20 by 30, so it's a 3-panel thing.
Right.
So it's 20 by 62, because there's an inch between the pictures. So that's what that array in the bedroom would look like. And then Monument Valley, I did the same thing, but these were on metal, 30 by 3, 30 by 20 by 30 prints separated. So that was my attempt at art. This was my first sailboat that I built here. This took me a long time, well more than a year. When I joined the yacht club, I went down to see what they were selling, and they're all selling boats called lasers. They're all plastic boats you could buy for about $500. But I thought, I'll build one. I'd rather build it than buy it. So I did. It took me a long time, a whole sailing season by the time I finished it. And it ended up costing me more than if I bought a laser. But it sails really nice. So that's not only called Emma, but the guy that designed it, the design is called Emma. So that's where the name Emma came from. And my next door neighbors, who are Canadians, every time they would come back from Canada, would give us bottles of maple syrup. And so the bottles were cool. So I had to do a ship in a bottle. So I photoshopped Emma into a ship in a bottle. And that's harder than you think because glass reflections and all of that stuff. You saw that I was taking lots of pictures of bubbles. Bubbles are tough because when you put the light on a bubble and you try to take a picture of it, you can't take a picture of the whole bubble.
That's right.
Because only, the angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. And if you can't get something reflect, so there's an arc, so you have to take just a piece of the bubble. But nevertheless, when you photograph bubbles, my God, they're just fascinating. They keep changing colors and these things, and they go from golds to blues to greens. So I thought they made good planets. So I made that picture of bubble planets. And I'm not the first guy to think they make planets.
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
The picture of the bubble planet that we've seen up there
Yeah.
many times does not have 2 moons.
Yeah, well, those are 2 more planets, they're not moons.
The 2
They're
more
just further out.
planets, excuse me.
They could be moons.
Um,
Yeah, I do different versions.
That was the question. How many different, so you have variations on a theme. How many have you done of a single main design?
Not many, probably just the 2 you saw, and then of course the array that I did for the book cover. But individually, I've got, I don't know how many 100 pictures of bubbles,
Right.
and they're all different, which is fascinating. So, in the camera club that we were in Mesa, they went to Monument Valley, which you saw some of the pictures. But it was kind of fun because, and Pat will help me out here, we were in Monument Valley, and the leader of our club set an appointment up with a guide to leave early in the morning, so we'd be in a certain spot that she had to have us for sunrise. Now, I'm the kind of photographer that goes out at noon when I say, that's not the good light. I did a lot of infrared pictures, and infrared is better at noon. But So that's, anyway, so there we were in this pickup. When we got up at 4 in the morning to leave at 5, it not only was pitch black outside, it was pitch black inside. They had a power failure in the motel. So we were taking showers and trying to get dressed with the flashlight from our cell phone. It was, and then we were going to have breakfast there before we left, and they didn't have any power. So we got in this, we were already cold. It was freezing cold, and we were riding in the back of this pickup, which wasn't completely covered. It was cold, and we rode and rode and rode in the pitch black, sand, couldn't see a thing. I thought, if this thing breaks down, I have no idea where we are. We're in the desert someplace. But anyway, we finally got there. We were all ready. The sun came up, and that was a picture from Monument Valley, where the experts would tell you that the sun was in the right spot. And then just, since we're still in Monument Valley, I love this picture. This lady was demonstrating her work on quilts or weaving and other things, and I thought, I like that picture. We've had that mounted in our house for a while. This is one of my favorite pictures of my granddaughter Chloe when she's helping Pat fix her hair. And that's my granddaughter Bailey. And that's another picture of Chloe over here. They're not that age anymore. Now they're into lacrosse, and they're in uniforms all the time with black stuff on their eyes, and they're not nearly as photographic as they were when I took this picture many years ago in Mesa with a 20 megapixel camera. 20 megapixel. Very, no, I'm sorry, 5 megapixel camera. Very low resolution, but I used that version of that for, I had several versions of those birds, but the parakeet, there were a lot of wild parakeets there. And in the top there's a cactus wren in the cactus, but the parakeets, there were several color parakeets, and we used to know which ones were which when they started mating and stuff. They were fun to have around. When we were in Alaska, I have this camera that I call it my flower camera. It's an underwater camera, but it can also do photo stacking and photo bracketing, both in camera. And it can do it even when the wind is blowing, which is nonsense. If you ever try to take a picture when the wind is blowing, it'll drive you nuts. You need this. Only you flower pictures on color. But this little camera, so at any rate, I discovered this frame someplace, and I thought, well, I can come up with 12 pictures because of all of the flower. And each one of these pictures is not normal. First I had a picture of a flower, but then I went through some apps on the iPhone to do artsy things with it.
Yes.
And so that's what, but it turns out if you mount a picture on a clothespin like that, it will curl. So the way you stop it from curling is to put a different picture on the other side. So now there's really 24 pictures here. They're all different, but I thought that was fun to do. I'll pass it around.
Some of them are very like stained glass, and others look Japanese with the outlines,
Yeah,
especially on the screen.
it's fun. When I was in high school, on the back wall of math class, there was a 6-foot picket slide rule. And I always wanted one of those. And one year, I picked up my wife, she was in community college. I picked her up from college, and there was a 6-foot picket slide rule sitting in the hall, and we were throwing it away. And I thought, oh! And I ran up to it, and my God, when you look at it, there was so many nicks and bangs, and I thought, I'm good at restoring things. I've taken a lot of rusty things and made them way cool. But my God, can you imagine repainting all of the little numbers on a slide rule or trying to get the text right? I had to pass it up. I said, I can't do it. You can buy them online, because what Pickett did was they gave that 6-foot slide rule to schools that sold so many of their other slide rules as part of the school curriculum. And in math class, our math teacher, which one of my favorite teachers, eventually we were taught in our class, because I grew up in the 60s, how to use a slide rule. So So I had a couple slide rules. I had one that I used in college, and I had this one that because I collect slide rules, and I got a whole bunch of slide rules. I got circular ones, tubes ones, but, so I had this log slide rule picket. It was, this is my nicest normal slide rule. So I figured, in my last house, I had this piece on the wall that was this big. So I figured, all right, I'll make my own. So that's what this is. So I printed it that size, and I cut out all the little pieces, and I made my little slide thing. Now, the middle doesn't slide because it's just a decoration, but I thought that was fun to do. But now, I moved in a different house. Now I have room for a 6-footer. But instead of that, when I was in the Navy, the first computer I worked on, we didn't have schematics. We had a data flow. Hard to describe, but you have to remember our computer was mechanical. The radar system was electronic, so we had to know which tube and which wires from which tube went to the next tube and what they all did. But the rest was all mechanical. So we had this big fold-up thing, 17 by this big, anyhow. And it was folded up, and we all had one in our pocket. And that's how we troubleshot the computer system and the bombing system. So here's a piece of it, because I had my old original data flow. Now imagine, this is the corner, and it's this long and double the height. And it was on this sort of waxy paper that you could fold up 1,000 times, but indeed I folded it up so many times, and I kept it, because this was this was new in 66. That's a piece of a data flow. That's my project I've been working on, off and on, for over a year. And I'm not nearly done, but I will finish someday. So this is my data flow. It's upside down. That's what we had in our pocket every day while we fixed 8 3D Sky Warriors on the flight deck of the USS Oriskany. It is so cool. Now, I'm slowly changing every letter on every word to make it text crisp and accurate instead of being as slightly blurry that it was because I took multiple high-resolution pictures and merged them all together. But I'm working on it. And when I get done, I'm going to mount it on a thing, put it on the wall, and it will fit. Because I measured. Any questions before we go?
Tons of questions.
Okay, and we want to draw some more tickets too. Go ahead.
First of all, you've read excerpts from a number of your books. You read about the fire on the ship. You read about your experience on the motorbike as a young man, as a young boy. You read your mother's poem. You read the first chapter from the first of your 3 fiction books, Water Data series. Everything seemed to be in the first person.
Yeah.
Could you discuss, please, say a word or two about, from an author's perspective, the difference between writing in the I and then the this did that, and something like that, or description. What's the difference in tonality, in length of sentence, in just the aspects of expression that go with first person to third person expression?
Tom can answer that question.
No, I'm asking you.
And the reason I can't is, the reason I write it in first person is because that's all I know how to do. I don't have like great I got a bachelor's degree in computer science, magna cum laude, thank God, but that's computers. I have trouble with the English language, and so I wrote the way, because that's the only way. Now, as I'm growing in writing, some of my sections and some of my things are in third person, but it's a struggle for me. So I'm writing this as though it's a memoir from my hero. Amy Randall in the books is going to do all of the thinking and all of the talking, with just a few exceptions where his good friend and employee will tell his other friend what he thinks about something, and so there's a little of that, but it's hard for me because I'm not that intelligent of the English language. You'd think it's a second language for me. Well, it is. My first language is Fortran, COBOL, BASIC, APL, Lisp. There's a language called SCAM, which I loved. C and C++. I know all of those. And I haven't done it for years now, since I've retired. But English is tough for me. But I love writing, and I won't stop, because you know, I have the picture in my mind for the cover for the third book already. So.
Already, okay.
And the title.
I have one more question. Where do female characters fit into your fiction world in Water Data?
They fit in Water Data 1, the sister-in-law of the guy that got killed, Linda. They have 2 daughters, and so I'm in their life a little. The deputy that helps the investigation, I hire his daughter because she's a computer whiz, and so she's in it. And then you'll see early on in the story, one of Raimi Randall's problems is he was married for only a year or so, and his wife died in childbirth, and he's affected by that, and so there's a gravesite visit and all of that kind of stuff. And then and he has 2 facilities, one in Minnesota and one in Apache Junction, and they mirror each other so that they back up data, so that this big data farm is in sync with the other one, so if there's a big fire, they haven't lost anything. So there's a staff at each end of 3 people, and each one of them has 2 guys and 1 girl, and the 1 girl is sort of the secretary, duty mother, cook, but she also handles all of the finances. And if you need to spend any money, you have to see her, even Randy, because he lets her handle that, and he doesn't know how much money he has. He lets her handle that, and then in Water Data 2, he's going to start falling in love again after 20 years of being a widower, or I don't know how many years. I'll have to figure it out. I have a spreadsheet so I can keep track of the timeline. But women are a very important part. And you know, it's funny because when I worked at Digital Equipment Corporation, we had a lot of female employees, and I think a much higher number than most companies at the time. And I never saw any prejudice at all about women in digital. The first occurrence I ever saw of women not being given was when my wife and I were having our wills done by a lawyer, or was it a closing? We had a female lawyer anyhow. And when we went to something where there were other lawyers, they were talking down to her. And I couldn't understand it. I thought, what the hell? What are you guys, you know? I never experienced that in my 30 years in digital. We never had anything like that. And in the Navy, when I was in the Navy, there were no ladies. And there, of course, there were nurses, supposedly, but I never saw a nurse. So now, of course, there are ladies in the Navy, but it just wasn't allowed then. So, you know, I have a very shaded view of women. I never saw the prejudice that women face on a daily basis, I guess. I didn't see it where I grew up in Hawley, Minnesota. I don't know in Hawley, we're a population of 1,200. I don't know any couple that ever got divorced. I saw a few people fighting, but they got over it the next day. So, you know, I grew up, I guess, with blinders on. I didn't know about the outside world and all these problems that exist. They didn't seem to exist in Hawley, they didn't seem to exist in the Navy, and they certainly didn't exist in Digital Equipment Corporation. Let's draw a ticket. So wherever Water Data 1 is, we'll give, that's the only one I have, but I'll give that away if you want. And how many tickets do we have left?
I don't know.
Maybe everybody will have one soon. 960? Choice of books.
About water data, is that one?
Yep.
Is it the one that's?
It's going around to now, right?
Yeah, it's right here.
Okay. It's hers when whoever's got it. Oh, just grab it then.
Thank you.
You're welcome. 956.
Yay!
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. 958. Tom, you've got a copy of all of them.
I've got copies of all these.
You don't have a she's pad on K, I bet.
Yes, I do, right here.
Okay. 164. All right. Is there anybody that didn't get one? I think everybody got one. Come on.
Have an that one?
What do you want?
That?
It's in the box, there's one in the box.
Okay, refreshments.
Thank you
Here,
so much.
this one's for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming. I wish there was more, but at least this way everybody won something.
This is mine. No, it has a for.
I grew up south of Miami in Mankato.
Okay.
But, you know, I was south of Virginia, Winnipeg, and all
Okay, but we left, I was 18, he was 19 when I got married, and we left Minnesota at that point.